Vinny the Wrench. Vincenzo wasn't known for his brains. Neither was his partner, Sal's sticky fingers Salvatore. So when they stumbled upon a top-secret lab during a botched robbery, they were more confused than a chameleon in a bag of Skittles. The lab was empty, except for a single table. On it sat a strange device covered in blinking lights and whirring gears. It looked expensive.
What do you think this thing does, Sal?
Vinny squinted at the device. Sal poked it with a greasy finger.
Maybe it's a fancy toaster? We can pawn it.
Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance. The cops! Vinny snatched the device. They hightailed it out of there. The strange contraption clutched tight in Vinny's meaty fist. Little did they know this wasn't just any gizmo. This was Professor Quentin's quantum chronometer, a time-twisting, age-altering machine. And these two stooges were about to give the phrase senior moment a whole new meaning.
To the docks!
Vinny yelled, his voice echoing down the alleyway. Sal, struggling to keep up with Vinny's thundering pace, nodded. They had a plan. A terrible, horrible, no good, very bad plan. But a plan nonetheless. And that plan involved a ferry. The salty air whipped through their hair as they sprinted onto the ferry. They just made it. The ferry's horn blared, the engine roared, and they left the cops in their dust. Or so they thought. Peeking over the railing, they saw the police cars pulling up to the pier. The ferry was packed. Tourists snapped photos. Children screamed with delight. And amidst the chaos, Vinny and Sal tried to blend in. Keyword tried. They were about as inconspicuous as a pair of hippos in a teacup. This time Sal grabbed the chronometer from Vinny. He pointed it at Agnes, his finger hovering over the button.
Let's turn her back! He shouted over the commotion.
But before Sal could press the button, a gaggle of giggling children bumped into him. The chronometer slipped from his grasp, bouncing across the deck. It landed with a resounding thump right between Vinny and Sal. They both lunged for it, their hands colliding with a sickening crunch. The chronometer pulsed once, twice, then erupted in a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, Vinny and Sal were gone. In their place stood two toddlers, barely old enough to walk, let alone pull off a heist. They both wailed, tears streaming down their chubby cheeks. One thing hadn't changed, though. They still desperately wanted that chronometer. Only now, their battle for time-bending dominance was reduced to a drool-drenched tug-of-war over a device that looked 10 times their size. The ferry passengers, oblivious to the time-twisting shenanigans, chuckled at the toddlers' antics.
"Someone call Child Protective Services," a woman cried, clutching her purse.
But before anyone could react, a tall, shadowy figure swooped in. He scooped up the chronometer, his face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat.
"Excuse me," he murmured in a voice as smooth as silk. "This belongs to me."
He gently pried the chronometer from the toddler's grasp. They were too stunned to resist. With a knowing smile, he melted into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as he'd appeared. The toddlers, now sans chronometer, and any recollection of their former, slightly less embarrassing selves, were left to ponder the meaning of their existence, which at that moment probably involved finding a juice box and a nap. The mysterious man, his prize secure in his briefcase, hailed a cab. He couldn't believe his luck. A time-manipulating device. The possibilities were endless. He just needed to figure out how to work the darn thing. He fiddled with the dials, his fingers trembling with anticipation. He'd always secretly wished he could turn back the clock, relive his glory days. But he never imagined he'd actually get the chance.
"Home, Mr. Blackwood?" his elderly secretary, Mrs. Danvers, asked with a sigh. She'd seen better days. And by better days, she meant days when her bones didn't creak like a rusty swing set.
Mr. Blackwood, too caught up in his own ambitions, barely even noticed her. He pointed the chronometer at himself, his eyes gleaming with a manic energy.
"This is it, Edna," he declared. "I'm going to be young again."
He slammed his finger down on the button. The chronometer sputtered, coughed, and unleashed a final ear-splitting blast of energy. Smoke filled the room. When it cleared, Mr. Blackwood was gone. In his place sat a gurgling baby, his toupee askew on his bald head. Mrs. Danvers, miraculously de-aged back to her 20s, stared at the scene in disbelief. The chronometer, its job done, clattered to the floor, broken into a million pieces. It seemed time, in the end, had the last laugh.